actually, do you want to give a little introduction about yourself before we kick it off?
Sure. My name is Brian Webb. I am our head of customer here. So that means I try to make sure that everybody is having a great experience from a customer success and service standpoint, but also taking a lot of the feedback we get from our customers and making sure that that's incorporated into our product and it's functioning the way that accounting and finance teams want. So I come from a background of being a controller at several different places and have sat in that seat before, and feel like I have a perspective that resonates well with our customer base.
Definitely. And my name is Lindsay Bunting. I am one of the co-founders of Blue Onion, also come from the finance and accounting side of the world. Personally experienced the issue of reconciliation at a company called Birchbox many years ago. So just again, love to see, customers' reactions and watch Brian, you work with them of just like, oh my gosh, like this thing does exist. So super excited to chat today. And really for today, I think, this is just going to be a conversation between me and you, which I think has a lot of questions. We'll almost make this like more of an interview style. I think to go through just like, what are some of like the frequently asked questions that either clients, prospects have about sort of their NetSuite setup, how Blue Onion works within their NetSuite setup, at different stages, what does that look like? How do we help? But also like, I think, Brian, a lot of them too just will ask like, what should I be doing? What should I be thinking about that I'm not thinking about today? So I think we can just go, I'm like, we can just do it like interview style, I think. And then if anyone else has any questions as we go, like, please put them into the channel, the chat channel, and happy to basically address those as we go. All right, so Brian, maybe, before getting into sort of the nitty gritty of, the NetSuite integration piece, maybe you can just talk about like a really high level, when someone's like, okay, I want Blue Onion integrated with my NetSuite integration, like from your perspective, like what are some of the main benefits, do you think?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think the perspective we get a lot from a lot of our customers is, hey, I already have a Shopify integration through NetSuite or Soligo or Boomi or something like that. It's bringing my orders over, and like, why do I need an integration with Blue Onion? Are you guys doing the same thing? Are you doing something different? And the answer is we're doing something very different, something that we think is pretty exciting, that we haven't seen really replicated elsewhere. And so the two main benefits is we're expecting that you have those integrations ahead, leading into your NetSuite, right? We're expecting that you have order flow coming into your NetSuite. And we're trying to really help with two specific problems that we've heard from our customers. The first of which is, those are like, we all want those integrations to work perfectly every single time, but we know it's kind of the nature of a lot of interdependent systems that transactions are just going to get dropped or come over incorrectly. And so what we're doing is we build an independent view of exactly what's happening in your Shopify or your Amazon store, all of your different payment processors, and the settlement into the bank, and comparing that to what's happening in NetSuite. So giving you a fully independent third-party check on everything that's flowing into your NetSuite and making sure that your transactions are recorded properly, that you have complete and accurate financials. So that's probably the first thing that we're doing. The second, again, is where Lindsay, I think you're totally right, is we get in calls with people and they say, does this really exist? And that's automating the bank reconciliation. So those connectors that we talked about, right, do a really great job of bringing those orders over, but it leaves you with a gap in your data, right? You have great order data coming over at a gross level of what your customer paid, and then you have a bank feed coming over on the other side, and you're left as an accounting or finance team to kind of fit those two pieces together. So you have a lot of payment processor records that are aggregated together, a lot of fees that happen in the middle. And so Blue Onion's doing all of the work because we have our own custom APIs we built to all of these different payment processors to rebuild those payouts for you, identify your cash sales, customer deposits, whatever transactions you're using in NetSuite, and deposit those into a bank payout.
That was an amazing summary. So maybe the other question, Brian, is okay, whether you integrate NetSuite, whether you are on the team, in-house accounting, what is your recommendation? Like if companies are like, is this a fit for me? Right? Like what type of customers are good fits for our NetSuite integration? And are there any sort of like technical requirements for us to be like, okay, like definitely yes or definitely no?
Yeah. I mean, I think we have a pretty flexible platform. I'd say the things that we have done many times over and are pretty standard for us, right, is if you have large e-commerce volume and that's all running through Shopify or through Amazon, and you have a lot of different payment processors, that's where kind of is our sweet spot, right? And where we see the most benefit for our customers, because as you increase that complexity, right, you're selling on both Amazon and Shopify, you have 5 different payment processors on Shopify. That complexity grows and grows and grows and is more work for humans today and most people's processes to do that we can take away. And so we've seen, success stories in that implementation realm where people are dedicating 1 or 2 full-time heads to reconciliation for maybe a full week of a close or even more, and we can cut that down to less than half a day in a lot of cases, and in a lot of cases I'm hoping that that's less than an hour actually. And so I'd say that's really our sweet spot. Some other things that we can do is some really exciting stuff where even if you're not selling on Shopify or Amazon, but maybe you have point of sale reconciliation that's really difficult, or you sell on Magento or BigCommerce or WooCommerce, some other platforms. We've actually used the NetSuite sales order as our order and connected that to payment gateways and are still able to successfully reconcile bank payouts in those scenarios as well.
And so, Brian, maybe to repeat back to you is, if you're doing a high volume of sales transactions and you probably have anywhere from, we've seen 1 all the way up to 10 different payment processors or different payment methods, and there's a lot of complexity in there, and you're pushing, for the most part, transaction level detail into NetSuite, you probably would be a good candidate, at least to have a conversation so that we can sort of, talk through a little bit more of the details of your setup. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yep.
All right. Okay. So maybe let's get into the nitty gritty a little bit of like, and we've had customers, I know even this week, right, come to you and be like, okay, how should I set up my NetSuite account so that I can use Blue Onion and automate this process?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say what we've built is trying to be as tech light for our customers as possible, right? And so if you're using Soligo, Boomi, native NetSuite, Shopify connector, Innate Sync, a lot of these different connectors that we've seen across a lot of different customers at this point, we handle those kind of out of the box, right? We've built ourselves to make sure we handle that. But alternatively, we love those conversations, right, Lindsay, where we're brought in at the beginning and we can kind of have some input on exactly how those setups are happening. So really all we need to know is, or need to have is, does NetSuite have an order ID on it, right? We need to be able to connect that transaction to the originating order in Shopify and also to the payment at the payment processor. So usually we'll do that from a Shopify order ID, or in those other cases, right, Magento order ID or a different situation, or a payment ID from the payment gateway. And so we've, again, really tried to build our platform to be pretty flexible. And if you can tell us, hey, I have this unique identifier in this field, we can generally reconcile your transaction and get you to a successful situation. I'd say the other place where people ask for recommendations on how do I set this up and where does it play well or not play well with Blue Onion, my answer again is we've tried to be pretty flexible, but that's around what types of transactions you're using, and then also where do those get deposited. And so I'd say that there's two branches of each of those conversations. There's people who are using a flow where they create a customer deposit when that transaction originally occurs, when the sale happens, and then record an invoice that closes against it when fulfillment happens to do the revenue reporting. The other philosophy on that is using cash sales. The difference on cash sales, right, is that the cash sale does both of those pieces of payment and revenue recognition in one transaction. And so in the case of Shopify, right, where you're collecting money upfront and your revenue doesn't happen until you fulfill later, it forces you to pick a direction of like whether I want my revenue to align with my cash, or I want my cash to align with my revenue, and can kind of create some odd outcomes for some people from some of the implementations we've seen. So in that case, I would generally recommend the customer deposit to invoice flow, just because it gives you the greatest flexibility to kind of decouple your cash and your revenue recognition. The final piece of that, and you asked for detail, Lindsay, so
No, I love it. This is awesome.
Is where do I deposit those transactions? And so that means, am I going into, whether you're using cash sales or customer deposits, is that going into undeposited funds and I'm using that as my sort of catch-all bucket? Or am I setting up sort of clearing accounts? And the way that NetSuite generally accomplishes that is doing child bank accounts for each of your payment processors, or for Shopify versus Amazon, things like that. And so again, we've built flexibility to approach the problem from either way, right? But where that differs in the solution is if you're depositing into undeposited funds, that would be a deposit transaction that goes into NetSuite to fully update the status of those cash sales or customer deposits and not leave them as open AR into perpetuity, versus the journal entry that we would use in the case of clearing accounts, because those cash sales and customer deposits have already been deposited into those clearing accounts, which are really bank accounts. We use a journal entry to sweep those out and create your bank deposits on the other side.
And sort of maybe continuing on that thread, Brian, I know that customers have asked, if I have a mixed use case, sometimes it goes into undeposited funds, sometimes it goes into a clearing account, can Blue Onion handle that? And then also too, just maybe even before that, as they're setting things up, like, should I have a clearing account for every payment processor? So would love to get your advice on that for everybody.
Yeah. So for the first question, we absolutely can handle when, again, I feel like the name of this talk should be Blue Onion is flexible, is we've built that to be flexible. So whether you have some payment processors that are going into undeposited funds and others that go to a clearing account, you can choose as you're pushing those transactions over to NetSuite what transaction type you'd like to use to clear that out. So totally flexible there, can handle whatever you're doing. Same thing, just to kind of talk back to that last conversation around cash sales, customer deposits. We pull in all of those transactions, whichever way you choose to go, we can facilitate that process. So there's not a wrong one, and there's some reasons that people choose the cash sale direction, even so.
If you have, what is the recommendation? Should I have clearing accounts for each different payment processor? Sure. Should I throw everything into one? What if I do, if I've just sort of haphazardly thrown those transactions into different places? Yeah.
I mean, I think that there's pros and cons to either direction, right? We'll talk about using undeposited funds as your catch-all and not differentiating across any sort of payment processor. I think the benefit that you have there is that you have full visibility on AR aging, right? So those transactions will live in AR and show you their status live as we're depositing those. So you'll know for sure on a customer level exactly what is owed to you for what transactions. And so that's kind of some of the benefit of leaving those in undeposited funds, is the connection of that status through the cash sale or customer deposit at a customer level. The detriment there, right, is that if you're trying to pick apart some of like what you're expected to be paid from some of your payment processors, if that's important to you, having that visibility of what Afterpay owes you versus PayPal versus ShopPay, that's a little bit harder. You won't have that directly on your balance sheet as a receivable from each of those vendors. You can still get there if you're using things like payment type, and you could do some safe searches around that, and there's ways to work around, but the granularity is maybe a little bit harder to get at. On the flip side, if you're using the clearing accounts, you get that visibility, right? You're going to have a balance sheet line that says this is what you're owed at from each payment processor at the end of the month, very clearly on your balance sheet. But that connection back to the original transaction is a little bit harder and a little bit looser. Again, in our solution, we are trying to give full auditability and connection to those transactions for you. But it's a little bit step removed in the same way that the clearing account balance would be in the undeposited function. I think that those are really kind of some of the really big pros and cons of each of those solutions. I'd say, sorry, one more con on the clearing account would be maybe just around your audit process, right? Is because you're not able to clear those out of your clearing accounts using a deposit transaction, you are going to be increasing the number of journal entries that are entered into your NetSuite. And a lot of like auditors are going to make sure that they do some extra diligence around manual, quote unquote, even though ours are automated, journal entries that are entered into your NetSuite. So it could increase the scope of like sampling that some of your auditors might be doing on a financial statement audit at the end of the year.
And then Brian, can you talk a little bit more about, okay, so now I have all of these transactions, either maybe they've been deposited, into a clearing account, holding account, right? Like how do we basically clear out those transactions? What does that look like?
Yeah. So if those are in the clearing account in the scenario you've proposed here, we're going to do it as a journal entry, as we've talked about, but maybe let's talk about like what exactly, how we're impacting your GL and what we're doing in that transaction. So, just to kind of talk about the state of the world before we got to where we're going to enter this journal entry, right, is you've had your sales order come across, you've had a customer deposit created on the back end, and then there's usually a script nightly or something like that would take that and deposit it into your clearing account. So in this example, we'll say it's a Klarna clearing account. You've had a bunch of debits into that for orders that you're expecting to get paid for. When we see that settlement hit the bank, what we will do is provide you a journal entry that would credit that out of the clearing account. So remove the balance. So again, that you would have that visibility of what you're owed from Klarna. So we'll remove that transaction by transaction as a credit out of your clearing account, and then also record any sort of merchant processing fees, any reserves that they might be holding back in that payout, all of the things that roll up and make an aggregated bank payout. We'll record those for you in the journal entry as debits and credits. And as a part of our onboarding process, we will walk you through, hey, here's every single payment type we've ever seen come through from Klarna. And you'll help us set up your chart of account mapping so that there's never any surprises about, you've never seen a reserve come from Klarna, but all of a sudden they did hold back some money in a future payout. We've already thought about that with you so that those payouts can continue to roll over into your NetSuite and account for things properly. And then I think finally, obviously the offset on all of that is a deposit into your bank account, right? And so the final piece of that is each journal entry is going to have a one-to-one relationship to bank deposit. And the intent there, right, is that you will always have, assuming you have a bank feed going into NetSuite, in match bank data, you'll have a corollary deposit from us or journal entry from us that maps to each of those bank payouts from your feed. And your match bank data is just auto matched through native reconciliation rules within NetSuite.
Brian, can you talk a little bit, is there anything that's different between using a clearing account and undeposited funds from sort of the Blue Onion workflow perspective?
Yeah, really, it's just the transaction that we're using to clear those out. It's the difference in a journal entry versus a deposit, and maybe just to kind of peel that back one layer, right, is the GL impact of each of those transactions is going to be identical. The way that it's impacting the status of different transactions within the NetSuite environment is what's really different there. In the clearing account world, the status of your payment transactions, so cash sales, customer deposits, all of those different refund transactions, those statuses have already been updated when they were sent over to the clearing account because it is a bank account. If they're sitting in undeposited funds, there still needs to be an update to that status to say that that sale or that deposit has been deposited into a bank account. And so that's really the nature of the differences of those two transactions that we're using and how it would impact the data within NetSuite.
Awesome. Is there, and maybe stepping away a little bit from, the Blue Onion piece within NetSuite, but sort of going through that onboarding process with companies, do you see a particular area where companies like run into issues? I'm like, maybe certain things that people are doing that would make their lives significantly easier if they weren't doing it in a certain way?
Yeah. A few things come to mind. I mean, I think when we talked about the difference in cash sales versus customer deposits, that's certainly one of them. Is when you're using cash sales, right, you're forced into choosing revenue to align with cash or cash to align with revenue. And that can leave you in some funny gaps in how you record deferred revenue at the end of the month or things like that, right? So if you chose to align your cash sale with the time of fulfillment, you will have a known lag at the end of every month where you're not able to account for all of your cash because you're waiting for items to be fulfilled. And that can kind of create some uncomfortable answers or just some workarounds that teams have to do to accommodate. The others are just on how that data is flowing through from some of the upstream integrations, right? So really common problems that we see on almost every customer is in certain scenarios, refunds just not syncing over in the way that they intended. So completely dropped and missing from NetSuite or haphazardly coming over. And so there's a lot of great integration partners out there that can help make sure that process is done correctly and those orders are syncing over. But one of the benefits of our product is if you're in that case, we do have order-to-order reconciliation there where we can identify all of those missing refunds. Another one that we've seen that really has caught some of our customers off guard is rate limiting on some of those upstream integrations, right? And so you have a really big Black Friday sale and your order volume increases 50% above what you normally do. And they don't realize that they have a limit on the amount of orders that can sync over on that upstream integration. And so there's a huge amount of orders that just are missing from their NetSuite. And again, that's where we've been able to provide some great benefit for our customers. And there's no rate limiting on our side unless that's happening from Shopify, but that rarely happens. And so we show all of those transactions that are missing and can really help in those cleanup projects to say, what's going on here? What are we missing? What do we need to update? How do we clean this all up?
Awesome. No, that's super helpful. And then I think, for companies that, when is the best time, right, for them to think about bringing on Blue Onion?
Yeah, that's a super great question. Something that we talk through with all of our customers as we go through the sales and onboarding process. I'd say what feels most intuitive for people is, hey, let me get this all onboarded. Let me make sure all of my upstream stuff is done in phase 1. And then in phase 2, I'll bring you guys in for a reconciliation module once that's all clean. And that makes sense, right? If you're thinking about just that payout reconciliation part of what we're doing, it's sort of like a back office function, right? You're doing the reconciliation on the back end of all of those things. But that part that we just talked about, right? Identifying discrepancies, helping to identify systematic errors and maybe some of the upstream integrations is something that our order reconciliation can be really powerful for. And so where we've seen a lot of benefit for some of our existing customers is actually partnering with them in that initial phase 1 of their implementation. When they start bringing in their order level data, to actually accelerate that implementation by identifying the systematic issues and getting those resolved in a faster feedback loop when their implementation partner is engaged and available to help fix those for them.
Awesome. So let's say that I'm a company and I'm like, okay, I'm ready to get started with Blue Onion. From your perspective, in order for us to be like, okay, this is going to be super easy, like home run, what should they basically come prepared with? And sort of what does that onboarding process look like?
Yeah. So what you should come prepared with, that is always most helpful, and especially as you're doing if you are one of these people who are in the midst of an implementation, coming with your implementation plan of when you're expecting, like, what are your different phases, because often we'll talk with customers and they'll say, well, we're implementing Jan 1 or something like that, but implementation means different things to different people, right? NetSuite is very customizable. And so if we have a clear view of what you're implementing and when, that helps us be able to advise what's the best time to bring us in, right? So if you're going live with NetSuite and you're just doing topside journal entries for a first couple of months, maybe our core product makes the most sense in that time frame, and then we won't connect on NetSuite until phase 2, when you start feeding your order level in, and we can do that order reconciliation for you and help identify those discrepancies. So really coming with that plan is really helpful. On the flip side, if you already have NetSuite implemented and you've been feeling this pain for a long time and you're just trying to create some efficiencies for your team, just coming to us with a map or someone that's really knowledgeable on your team of exactly how orders flow through your system, of what transaction types you're using, what are the triggers that actually create those transactions, where are they getting deposited. Those are really the best things for us to know ahead of time or in that first call. And then finally, who's your NetSuite admin is probably one of the, just a really practical thing that is sometimes a blocker for people, is someone that actually has the right access to grant us the ability to do what we need to do.
Awesome. And I know you mentioned something in there that we didn't really talk about, but the core application, right? Like used in conjunction with, the NetSuite implementation piece. Can you talk a little bit more about how we've seen customers use and leverage sort of core, especially in like the earlier days when they're just kicking off a NetSuite implementation?
Yeah, we do this a lot with our customers who are transitioning from maybe Xero or QuickBooks over to NetSuite. So kind of moving from like bookkeeping to more of like an ERP sort of change. And where that really helps is, right, there's going to be this interim state where you're not fully relying on all of the data that's coming over from NetSuite, and you need to make sure that you have a great backstop so that you can continue to meet all of your financial deliverables. Like the world is not going to stop while you're doing your NetSuite implementation and not ask for financials. And so what we do in our core app is we take that independent view that we're building to do these reconciliations for NetSuite, right? And we actually layer on an accounting lens on top of those and propose journal entries for you based on all of that data, do that full order to cash reconciliation for you, so that we can actually lift a lot of the burden off of your accounting and finance team in the time where they're actually being asked to do a lot in this implementation, and try to streamline that whole process so that you can focus on the implementation. You can make sure that that's successful and still deliver your financials.
Awesome, Brian. That is super helpful. I know we get these questions a ton, so I think just being able to hear it from you, I think will help people a lot. Is there anything, just as like a last question, is there anything that I didn't ask that you think would be helpful for people to know as they're contemplating sort of, Blue Onion with NetSuite, maybe even just like a NetSuite implementation?
Yeah. I mean, maybe just like a advice / word of warning is having a great network of people in NetSuite, a great implementation partner, is super, super important. We've seen a lot of our customers who are suffering for a long time after their quote unquote go live date, with just really bad data coming through. And like we said, the sweet spot that we're really working with is really high volume and really complex payment setups. And if you don't like measure twice and cut once in your setup, right, make sure that you have a good plan and you're implementing that plan well. The pain that's felt into like almost perpetuity for your accounting and finance team is pretty significant. And it's a lot more of an investment to clean that up than to get it right from the beginning. So making sure that you're not just pushing forward on a certain go live date and making sure that you're just trying to hit that date, but making sure that you've actually got everything in place to have a successful launch, and that you're not creating headaches for your future self.
Brian, I think that's it. I think those are all the questions.
Well, this has been super fun.